All right, I'm Donna, and I am an alcoholic. And I've been sober ever since you began teaching me how. The teaching began November the 7th, 1988. For that, I am truly grateful. And it's good to be back in this room. It's there's a lot of good memories in this room for me. And so I'm here tonight to tell you what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today. And before I get started, I am an alcoholic. I'll die an alcoholic. There is no cure. There's the 12 steps of this program. And for that, I am truly grateful. And when I came to you people, I used to say, I'm Donna and I'm an Anda. And I went, because I was. I started drinking when I was 15 years old. It was a bright, sunny August day. It was my girlfriend's 16th birthday. And she called me up. It was a little town in southern Illinois. And she said, I got a brand new, now I'm going to date myself, okay? A brand new 1972 blue and white Malibu. And she said, I'm coming to get you, and we're going to go down Burnt Prairie Blacktop. Now, this little town in southern Illinois was in a dry county, so it was kind of hard for us to get alcohol. So she came and got me. There was a bottle of wine and a bag of dope in her car, and that's how it started. There wasn't anything wrong. There was no great tragedy. It was my first time. I puked, I blacked out, and I wanted to do it again. You know, and I did for a long time. And so I thought because of that event that I was an alcoholic and So one day, I was probably about 6 months sober, and it was a closed meeting. I sobered up at the Atascocita group. And it was a closed meeting, and this girl stood up, and she said her name was so-and-so, and she was a CA. And at that time, there was this old man by the name of Keith that used to come, and he might have been considered the AA police. He might have been considered maybe the AA Nazi, you know. And he stood up and he said, excuse me, young lady, you'll have to leave. And everybody goes, you know. And he said, this is a closed meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, I'm young and dumb in sobriety. I didn't know the difference between a closed meeting and an open meeting, and there was a little hoopla, and people got mad. Oh, she can stay. No, she can't. She can stay. Anyway, long story short, she ended up pissed off, and she left. Waterfront Joe and I went to lunch that day, and I went, Joe, what happened? And he goes, well, he was right. It was a closed meeting, and she identified herself as a CA. And I said, well, what's the difference? And he goes, well, the traditions. He said the only requirement was a desire to stop drinking. I said, okay, well, and then I went through my little story, how I started, picked up alcohol and drugs the same day, and I rarely did one without the other, and I've done other substances. Joe went, Donna, does this work for you? Can you identify? And I said, yes. And he goes, and when you have nothing else, what did you do? I said, I needed alcohol. I had to have alcohol. And he said, and he patted my leg, and he goes, well, honey, why don't you just be one of us? And out of respect for this program, I love that word, respect. he said, why don't you just become a good old garden variety drunk? I'm Donna and I am an alcoholic. And I know today I'm what that book describes, just a good old garden variety drunk. What I got here when I came to you people, it probably enhanced me and got me here just a little bit quicker. But I'm an alcoholic, true and true. Before I started drinking, there was some tragedies in my life. And I'm not here to tell you, we all have a sad story, and my story is the saddest because it's mine. And it's a sad story. My dad died when I was 2 years old. I'm oil-filled trash. My daddy in 1958 was working on the rigs up in the panhandle of Texas, and the rig exploded and killed him. My mom took us back to that little town in southern Illinois. My dad was the eldest of 10, and we went back to his hometown in southern Illinois. About a year and a half later, my mom dropped all the marbles out of her basket, and she was sent to the Illinois State Hospital for about a year and a half to 2 years. And us kids, I'm the youngest of 3 girls. I have 2 older sisters. My oldest sisters stayed in town with my mother's family, and I went to the country with my dad's family. And I was spoiled rotten by those aunts and uncles of mine. And my grandpa allowed me to run wild on his farm. He wasn't a rich farmer, he was a poor farmer. People around town used to say the only thing Raymond can grow is kids. And that was about the truth. That was about the truth. But my grandpa loved me, and he would take me out on that tractor, and he'd take me skinny dipping, and I was just in heaven. Now, my mother's mother would come and get me and take me up to where my mom was. And I would sit there, and they would bring her out of the room, and she'd be doing the Thorazine shuffle, and she'd have that little drool. And I can remember saying, I'm never going to end up in a place like that. I'm never, ever going to end up. And I ended up in a place, they call them treatment centers today. I ended up in Laurelwood Hospital. It's on the north side, well, it was, it's no longer there, for 21 days. And the first 4 of them were in that little padded room and in a little jacket that made you look like you were hugging yourself. And I was insane. And I needed a drink. I ended up in a place just like my mother. And my mom didn't drink. We didn't have alcohol in our family. Mom kept a bottle of Mogan David wine, and when I discovered alcohol, I kept drinking it and pouring water in it or grape juice in it so she wouldn't know I was in it. She didn't drink. I used to tell her, Mom, you'd feel better if you had a drink. If you just have a drink, you'd be okay. And we didn't see it a lot. I wasn't a bad kid in high school. I was very social in high school. I wasn't there to learn. I wasn't there. I liked high school, though. But I wasn't in high school a lot either. I'd go to school, but I wouldn't stay. I wasn't a dumb kid. I just didn't apply myself. I got involved with this man. He kissed me. That's the bottom line. He kissed me. And I was going to fix him. Alan got in trouble with the law, and back then, Uncle Sam needed a few good men, and he left. And I was supposed to marry this guy right out of high school. And he got stationed in Germany, and he wouldn't take me with him. So the wedding was off. And by then I was drinking. And I was drinking during school, after school, before school. I'd take off with a group of guys and girls, and we'd go down to the bottoms in this little town, and we'd stay out there, and then I'd come home, you know. We just drank, and we had fun. We weren't bad, we weren't vicious, we just drank. And that just seemed like the thing to do. But when Alan left me, I didn't know what I was going to do, and there was a little junior college about 45 miles away, and I went there, had no idea, didn't have a job, but I went there, decided I needed to go to school. That was, you know, that. And the girl I roomed with, God, she was smart. Now, she was smart. She was in the top 10. She was in plays. She was in the band. She was, and we really didn't run together in high school, but I needed a roommate. You know, you guys, I used people, I don't know about you, for my needs. And thank God for this program. Thank God for the steps. Because you see, I had no clue that my life was unmanageable. You know, when I drank, we didn't talk about, well, maybe we ought not to drink so much. We didn't talk about maybe alcohol was interfering with our everyday living. Well, maybe we didn't talk. I didn't know about Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, we didn't, you know, this was the early 70s. I graduated high school in 1974. That's a long time ago. But anyway, Kim and I became roommates, and Kim's parents moved to Indiana and left her out on her own. And Kim was like, she was just she was out partying all night. She was doing this, and I had started dating this guy, and his parents owned an oil company, and he was back in this little town in southern Illinois. So a lot of times I'd drive back there to be with him, and you know, he kissed me, and we were in love and all of this. And when I turned 19 years old in southern Illinois at that time, I became legal. And they opened some liquor stores. It became a wet county. And I walked into the liquor store, bought a bottle of 151 rum, and David had a lake, so we were out at the lake all night. This is the only time I ever got caught drinking. And because I'm real sneaky. And I had an older sister, Susie, and Susie, we drank a lot together. And Susie got in a lot of trouble. Susie didn't know how to come in at curfew. Susie liked to do, and I learned that if my mom said, "You're home at midnight," I was home at 11:59, because I wasn't going to get in trouble. You see, I learned. Because I'm sneaky. I like people to believe I'm something I'm not. So, long story short, I came home that weekend. It was my 19th birthday, bought my rum, went out to the lake, got drunk. David was carrying me in the house when we broke my mother's antique lamp. And she was pissed. She was really pissed. And my mom and my dad, now my stepdad, and I'm going to say this, any man who raises another man's children as well as my stepfather, my hat is off to you. My stepfather was military. He wasn't real lovey-dovey. He wasn't, but that man taught me how to play softball. He taught me how to bait my own hook. He taught me how to drive 3 on the tree. I can drive a stick shift. And he was a good man. never laid a hand on me, never raised my voice. It was because of his character that kept me out of jail one night. I know that. He was radio dispatcher at this little town in southern Illinois at the police station. And a bunch of us kids got pulled over one night, and we had booze and other stuff in the car, and the chief of police yanked me out, and he goes, "If I took you to jail right now, it would kill your dad." And he let us go. Not my good character. It was because of my dad. And I never gave him credit for anything. He was just the man my mom lived with. He was just the man my mom was married to. I didn't even call him Dad. I called him Charles the whole time we had him. You know? He never saw me sober. He died before I got sober. But you know, I've been able to rectify that. I've been able to take that fourth step, look at my part and understand, because I always felt like I was missing something. I was abandoned. God had taken my dad from little girls. God had been cruel. He gave me a dad. And I had a dad. I wasn't abandoned. And I thank God for that today, that I can acknowledge that Charles was my dad. You know, when Kim died, I had to look, because Kim was murdered. 19 years old, first time away from home. I came from a town like Mayberry, RFD. I'm out at college. I'm not supposed to do anything. That night, David and I got caught drinking. The next morning, my mom and dad always went to church on Sunday morning. I mean, always went to church. But boy, I could hear her downstairs slamming those cabinet doors, because I had got caught drinking. And all of a sudden, here came the chief of police, and then pretty soon here came another state policeman that was friends with my family, and I'm going, what the hell did I do last night? I couldn't remember. I was so hungover. And they told me Kim had been locked in a trailer up in Olney, where I was going to school at, and didn't make it out. And it was murder. And it was just a nightmare. And I did not, you know, I carried that for a long time. I felt guilty. Because back then, and thank God I don't know how it was today. Thank God I don't know. But you know, when people got certain things, they just kind of said, hey, so-and-so has some red bud. Hey, somebody has some window pane. Hey, you know. And so I said, hey, I know where y'all can do, and Kim had gone. Kim was pretty messed up, according to the police reports. And I told her where to get it. I felt real guilty for that. I carried that for a long, long time, and I used that as an excuse to stay drunk, especially around my birthday. You know, when I did my fourth step, here's another revelation. I really didn't like Kim. You know, can you imagine? But I needed her to rent an apartment, to go to school. I needed, and I really did not like her. But I didn't like me either, because I knew the truth. You know, for me, alcohol didn't take me anywhere or make me do anything that I didn't choose to do. A lot of times I knew what I was doing. Alcohol made my world okay. I knew I was using Kim. I needed a roommate. I needed away from that little town. I wanted to be out there playing a big girl who really was not a big girl, you know. So When I go back home, I go out to Kim's grave. I'm sorry she's not here today, if I could change it. But you know, just like we do, Kim had self-will. Y'all have allowed me to give up the responsibility of Kim's death. If I could change it, I would, but I can't. Y'all have given me a way to live with my past and not in my past. And I am so grateful for that. I wish she was here today to experience life as I know it today. But I can't change it. So I go and I put flowers. I put flowers on her grave. I spend half the time when I'm back home at the graveyard, I think, because here's all my family's out there now. So I went off after all of that was solved. The murder was never solved. You know, we have a pretty good idea what happened, but they never could prove it. So I decided I needed to leave that town, and I go to a little town in Tennessee to a Cumberland Presbyterian school. You know, it was 800 people, 400 were there because it was church affiliated, 400 were there because it was away from home. And guess which side I went to, you know. I found people who were just like me and who did things just like I did. And I met my first husband. Now, the oil company that my dad worked for had set us girls up with a trust fund. And, you know, for 1958, it was a sizable amount of money. And when I turned 18, I got access to that money. And, you know, my uncle was vice president of the bank by then. And my poor Uncle Jerry. You know, he would call me up and he'd say, Donna, you are $600 overdrawn. And I'd say, just take it out of savings. I had no clue. I said, Jerry, just fix it. You know, do what you have to do. And because I was buying parties, you know, I'm the one, Friday night, what are we going to do, guys? Well, nobody has any money. I do. Let's go get a keg, you know. Let's go do this. What else do we need? I bought people's friendship. I bought to make me look good, knowing what I really was. So I kind of bought my first husband. You know, he kissed me, and he was a good guy, but he didn't like to work. You know, the day we got married, and you know, we never listened to our elders, or at least I didn't, because I knew everything. You know, my mom sat in the church that day with sunglasses on. And I went, now, Mom, do you think these people aren't going to know who you are? Well, she had her sunglasses because she had been crying for days. Don't get married. Don't do this. You know, he had been married twice before. You would have thought I'd known something. But I was going to fix him. You see, I was going to turn him into and what we did, we drank up all that money. After 4 years, the money was gone, and we were getting ready to be kicked out of our apartment. We were getting ready to get the car repossessed, and he wasn't doing anything. At this time, my mom had quit talking to me. She wouldn't let me back in the house. And I was getting ready to, I did go to, I was going to college, and I did finish. I was getting ready to graduate. And it was during this time that I discovered what I have loved for the last 40 years. This is kind of scary, but I teach your children. And But during student teaching, I really discovered I had a passion for it, and I wanted to finish. And like I said, we were getting ready to, the money was gone, and they were getting ready to, he wouldn't go to work, he wouldn't go to classes, he wouldn't, I was paying for him to go through school with me, and it was just a nightmare. And I went to my mom. By this time, we had moved up to Michigan, because my brother and sister-in-law, my sister and brother-in-law had a dairy farm. And they offered us to come up there, and I could finish school, and he could go to work on the farm. And so we went up there, and we lived with them for about 3 months. And we couldn't understand why they asked us to leave after 3 months. It probably had something to do, we ran up their phone bill, we ate their food, we drank their booze, and didn't offer a dime. And they had 2 little kids. And we would lay in bed half the time, sobering up or whatever, We used them. See, there I go, using people again. And being mad when they asked us to leave. They said we couldn't afford you anymore. Can you imagine? So, anyway, I go back to my mom, and I said, Mom, I need to borrow some money so I can finish school. And, I had just finished my student teaching, and it was getting time to graduate, and so what she said to me, she said, you've made your bed, now go lie in it. She said, I have no money to give you. My stepdad, my dad, stepped in. And he said, I will not give you the money, but we will go to the bank and I will co-sign a loan for you, and you will finish school. And that's what we did. And I went back to Grand Rapids, and I dropped $100 on the table. I bought him a bus ticket, and I sent him back to Tennessee. Never talked to him again. Never. He would call, I'd hang up. His mom would call, I'd hang up. Never talked to that man again. So I am back in my mother's good graces. I'm the good kid again. I don't know about you. My mom used to say, Donna never gave me a bit of trouble until she turned 16 and started doing things on her own, And that's about the truth, y'all. So she's turning her garage. She's getting the contractors. She's going to turn her garage into my apartment. I get a flyer, and it says immediate job openings. Call this number. So I called the number. And there was this, now I'm in Grand Rapids, Michigan, okay? There was this gentleman on the phone, and he had a deep Southern accent. He kind of talked like Daryl when I first met him. And he talked about bayous and magnolias. And he asked me some questions. Now, I'm on the phone. And he said, is there anybody I can verify this information? And I gave him my student teacher that I was working under and my student advisor. He called me back the next day, and he offered me a job. Now, I had been interviewing jobs all over Michigan. And back in 1982, when I finally graduated, took me a little while, you notice that, to graduate, And somebody should have told me to drop those F's off my transcripts, but they didn't. So he said, do you have any questions? I said, yeah, one. And he goes, what's that? I said, where is this place? And he goes, honey, we're in Morgan City, Louisiana. I went, oh, okay. And I get a map. I'm going to the beach. If you look on the map, Morgan City's right there on the coast. I'm going to the beach. Okay? Yes. This was August the 15th, 1982. He said, you have to be down here by August the 20th to start school. So I called my mom, good old mom, and I said, I've got a job. She said, oh, did you get that job up in Sault Ste. Marie? And I went, no. I'm going to Morgan City, Louisiana. There she goes, dead silence. My dad gets on the phone. What'd you do to your mom this time, Donna? Nothing, I got a job. Y'all don't have to turn your garage into my apartment. I got a job. So they came, they packed my little apartment. I had a 1977 Chevette, no air conditioning. I packed my pots and pans, my TV, my clothes, and my cooler. And I headed from Grand Rapids, Michigan down to Morgan City. There was no beach. I'm drinking. I get to New Orleans. I have to cross that Huey P. Long Bridge. I get lost. I don't know where I am. All of a sudden, I see this sign for some oil refinery, and then Thibodeau. Finally, I make it to Morgan City. Y'all, there was no beach. You know, back in 1982, when the guys would come in from the barges, it was right before the oil bottomed out. And there were transients and people all, and it was like something, they had these tin huts with these women standing outside of them for when the guys came off the barges, when the guys came off the rigs. I had never seen, there was no beach. You know, I was hot, I was tired, I was drunk, and I had no air conditioning. I pulled into the Holiday Inn, and I called my mom. I said, I'm coming home. I am not staying here. All those things you said God was going to get me for, he has sent me to hell. And that's exactly what I told her. I said, Mom, it's awful down here. And she said, stay. Stay until December. It was wonderful. God sent me to Mecca for a drunk. I mean, those people partied for everything. There's the blessing of the fleet. There's the crawfish festivals. Yeah, the strawberry festival is over in St. Martin. The crawfish festival in Broussard. And, you know, back then, the Catholic Church, if they needed money, they just had a beer bust in the park. And they had these little things called cherry bells that you could pull to win money for. I was in heaven. I was in heaven. And 3 girls and I rented this house. And it was Party City. Wednesday night we had Wacky Wednesday. So we were drunk. You know, then there was the weekend, Friday, Saturday. Oh, wait, sometimes Friday night we would drive into New Orleans to go down Bourbon Street, you know, to Pat O'Brien's and some of the other places down there. And sometimes one of the girls lived in Pensacola, Florida. Her parents lived over there. So when we would leave New Orleans, we'd just go to Pensacola for the weekend. I mean, you know. I used to tell you people I never got fired from a job, but that's not true. They didn't ask me back that first year. It probably had something to do with being in a bar one night, standing on the tables going, "I teach your kids." You know? Thinking nothing wrong with that. Just drinking, having a good time, living. So I went 35 miles down the road to this little town called Jeanerette, Louisiana. And I stayed there for 3.5 years, and I calmed down, did a lot of in my apartment drinking, but I got restless, irritable, and discontent and came here. Found some old high school friends that lived over here and started coming to Houston, and I needed to be in Houston. See, I was always looking for something better. I was always thinking, well, if I moved here, it's going to be better. You know, it's going to fix me. I'm going to do things different, and it wasn't different. Found a group of people who drank just like me. Fell in love with anybody who'd kiss me. You know, I didn't know how to have a relationship with anybody. I took hostages. You were on earth to make me happy. You were on earth to fill my needs. The hell with your needs. And when you didn't meet my needs, I was done with you. And then sit around and say, "Poor me, poor me, poor me," and drink. I was over here about 4 years, and I got a job in a little town about up north of here. And I was teaching second graders. I was involved with this man, and he and I had a bet that I could go a week without drinking. Now, I'm a hard drinker. I don't drink beer. I like the hard stuff. Jack in the Black, Jack Daniels was my drink of choice. And because I wanted to drink hard, I wanted to get drunk fast. And so the bet was I could go a week without drinking, and he had a Budweiser in his hand, okay? And I went, well, you can't go a week without drinking beer. And the bet was on. Okay. Go to work. You know, I'm a little cranky Monday morning because I hadn't had anything since the bet on Saturday. By Wednesday, I couldn't write on my chalkboard. Friday, I passed out in front of a room full of second graders because I needed a drink. I'm not proud of that. I'm not proud. That's my story. I needed a drink. I convinced the school they were getting ready to call the ambulance. No, I've got the flu. I had the flu a lot. I don't know about you. I was sick. You know, I couldn't go to work on Monday because Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I partied. Wednesdays, I was drinking, so I couldn't go to work on Thursday because I might show up on Friday to start it all over. It was just a vicious cycle. It was like being caught on a rabbit or in a maze, and I couldn't find the way out. And nothing I did ever made me happy. Nothing. And I had to fabricate these stories, you know. And y'all used to tell me, Donna, you're such a good, nice person, and that'd be like a knife in my gut because you guys, I'm a liar, a thief, and a con. There's just a lot of shit I didn't get caught at, I'm going to tell you. I did not get caught. Should have. But I didn't get caught. So I went to the doctor. I convinced the school not to call the ambulance. I had the flu. Let me just go and take care of this. And so I went to the doctor. And that man looked at me and he said, "What are you coming off of?" I mean, not what's wrong, why are you here today? He looked at me and said, "What are you coming off of?" And for some reason, I told him the truth. I said, well, I haven't had a drink in a while. He said, let's put you in treatment. Now, this was the end of the school year. And I said, oh, no, I've got to be. See, we just fabricate. Nobody can do my job. I've got to be there for the end of the year. My kids need me. And I told this story very early in sobriety. We had gone out to breakfast one morning. You know how we used to do, Daryl? We went on Saturday, we went out to breakfast, and there was this long, tall drink of water by the name of Jesse. And he looked at me that Saturday morning, and I was telling this story about even though I was cracking up, I had to be at my job, you know. And in order to be there, so the psychiatrist gave me these little pills called Xanax. And he goes, these are going to get you through until, and I promised him I would go to treatment. I promised him. When I left for school, that last day of school, I had my suitcase in my car, and I was heading to treatment soon as school was out. And I told that story, and Jesse just looked at me, and he goes, you're just really full of shit, aren't you? How could they talk that way to me? Y'all are supposed to be nice to me. And he goes, who is teaching your kids? Because I told him. I sat in the lounge half the time, smoking cigarettes when you could smoke at school. Smoking cigarettes, drinking Cokes, and popping Xanax. And he goes, who was watching those kids? I said, well, the other teachers took care of it. And you're going to sit here and tell me you did your job? Oh. See, you loved me enough to tell me the truth. You didn't pat me on the head and say, oh, honey, it's going to be okay. You loved me enough to tell me the truth. Pissed me off. But it was the truth. I wasn't who I thought I was. So I went off to treatment, 21 days, and you would think after 21 days and $27,000, I would have never drank again. That's not my story. The day they released me, I sat with the tech and said I was going to get my life right. They put me on these little buses back then. My first AA meeting was in a group in the Woodlands called the Serenity Group. And at that time, it was in a horse stable. And I walked in there and I looked around and I saw where I was. And there was this man, and I really think I was delusional because I've never seen him, I've never heard. But he talked about how he had been in jail from coast to coast. He had been married 13 times, and he had had his throat slit. And I thought, well, if I ever did something that bad, if my drinking ever got bad, I'd do something about it too. I'm the one on the little white bus going back to the hospital. You see, I didn't really think I was an alcoholic. And I went to AA meetings in order to get out. I learned to say I was an alcoholic. And you know, the book talks about if there's any reservation, step over to the nearest bar. Sometimes, in my opinion, we don't talk about that enough. If there's any reservation whatsoever. I had a reservation. When I got to my apartment that day, after sitting with the tech saying, I'm never going to drink again, I'm going to get my life right, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And there was a bottle of Jack Daniels with a big red bow on it that said, welcome home. And I popped the cork and went and saw Roger Rabbit. And I'd go to AA. Now, I don't know about you, but there's nothing worse sitting in an AA meeting and wanting to drink, for me. I was in a meeting one day, and this lady goes, nothing ever bad has ever happened to me since I've been in AA. Y'all messed up my drinking. because then I started playing the game. Well, I'm not really an alcoholic. I can control it. I can do this. I walked out of an AA meeting one Saturday morning because y'all were talking about how wonderful it was to be in AA, how grateful you were to be in AA, how wonderful God was, and I was miserable. The pain of being sober, and I wasn't sober. I was sitting out in the parking lot having a drink, thinking y'all couldn't smell it. You know? I'd have a drink before I went to an AA meeting. You know? And I walked out of that bar and I stayed there until I couldn't stand it any longer. And the reality was I couldn't get drunk. I drank that day and I couldn't get drunk. I finally could not kill the pain inside of me. Finally, alcohol quit working for me. We had been up to the Renaissance Festival. I'd been drinking all day. The next morning, I had driven off into a ditch, and I woke up in my little Chevy S10 pickup I had back then, and there is this man banging on the window, dressed up as Rambo, because November it was the first day of deer season, okay? And he's dressed up like Rambo. Ma'am, are you okay? Ma'am, open the door, ma'am. Instead of saying, thank you for caring, or I'm okay, I said, you son of a bitch, and I drove off. And I went home. And I couldn't get drunk. I went to some friend's house, because I knew they had something else that was stronger than what I needed, and I was tearing up their house. And why they didn't call the cops on me, I don't know, because I'd call the cops on them. Instead, they called their minister, and he took me in the bathroom, and he said, you know, you've tried it every way possible. Don't you think it's time you try God's way? We got down on our knees, and he was quoting and this and that, and he said, do you have anything to say? And I said, God help me, I can't live like this. So he wanted me to go to his church, and I looked at him and I said, no, if I'm going to do this thing, I have to go back to Alcoholics Anonymous. I walked into you people on November the 7th, 1988, and I've been here ever since. And I haven't had a drop of alcohol since then. Now, two things happened when I came into AA. I sobered up, and when I walked into the door that day, there was two men standing at the door greeting. One was a man who's no longer with us by the name of Frank Baker, and the other was Bob Ferrier. He kissed me. Bob and I were together for 30 years. Now, I know what they say, no, this and that, but I thank God for this woman who was my sponsor back then. When I went to her and I said, look, we're going to start, and I had just gotten out of a 2-year relationship, and I loved him. I mean, the first day, 30 days after I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, we were together. You know, 3 months later, we're living together. You know. My first sponsor said to me, you don't stop living because you come into AA, you learn to live differently. If you were to drink, if he were to leave you, would you drink over him? And I said, well, hell, I don't know. I've never done this sober. You know, and that was the truth. And then she said, when you're in a meeting, you don't sit together. You don't play patty cake. He's not your husband. He's not your lover. He's just another drunk sitting in an AA meeting trying to stay sober. And then she sent me to the women at Kingwood. She made me go to those damn women's meetings. And I fell in love with them. Because there's an old saying around here, sometimes we don't like to say it, but I don't care. The men will pat your ass, but the women are going to save your ass. And those women of AA have saved my ass. Bob and I were together for 30 years. And I want to say this, Brett, I am so ever grateful for your dad. Because when I got up and got my desire chip that night, he was chairing the meeting. And he said to me, "Thank God you made it back. Thank God your dad was there." And Bob was a crusty old fart. He wasn't a real easy man. He was an old construction worker. Cussed like he was off the docks, cigarettes. But he was good to me. We learned. And there was a couple, and she was a black belt Al-Anon, and she taught me. She taught me that Bob had a life, I had a life, and together we could have a life. But he was not my God. He would fail me. And he did on a regular basis. On June the 9th, 2018, I gave Bob back to God. It was probably one of the hardest things I've ever, because you see, to me, we're just loaned things and loaned people. People are in our lives. Hell, Daryl used to sit with me for hours because when I was too afraid to go home, he would stay with me after the meetings and talk to me until it was okay for me to go home. I've never forgotten that. I've been so grateful. I'd like to sit here and tell you I've never thought about drinking, but I have. I just haven't wet it down sometimes. When I came to you and got a job in Splendora, I told it. So that's where I retired from that place. A job who should have fired me. I've been able to retire, and I've gone back, and I've been subbing. This year is my 40th year up there, working in that district. And they like me. They like me. But there was a group of teachers, and I'll say this, this being sober has afforded me so much. I have been able to do things I've never thought I was doing. So this group of teachers, one was a Methodist daughter's, her dad was a Methodist preacher, I can't even get it out. One was a Catholic, and one was just nice. Nothing like me, okay? So we started traveling together, and we went to Rome, a trip of a lifetime. I never thought about going to places like that when I was out there drinking. I never thought about being around women like that when I was drinking. I didn't think I ever fit in, So we went to the Vatican. And, I'm not Catholic. I'm the Cumberland Presbyterian and stuff. So, if you ever get the chance to go to the Vatican, it's built like a cross. And over on the left-hand side, there's this chapel that they still have services in. And the day that we were there, they had just had a service. And it was, we got there about 3 weeks before Pope John died. So there was a lot of people there and commotion. And so after the service was over, I went and sat in that little chapel area. And there were hundreds of people, and the floors are marble, and there's all this clicking and clacking on the floor, and all these people. I've never had an experience like this before. All the sound went away. All of a sudden, I knew I was loved. I knew that God was not going to strike me down. I knew that I was in a presence greater than myself. I'm sure part of it is because I was just caught up in the moment of just being there and seeing the grandeur, but I have never felt like that. And then the sound came back, and I went on my merry way. You know, God in this program has given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. Even in the darkest times, even of the just not drinking alcohol. It's no longer look what God has done to me. It's what God has done for me. A God that I hated and a God that I was mad at. For some reason, I don't think I'm any special person. If you got up before I did today and it's summertime and I sleep in, you know, then you have more sobriety than I do. I just have a little bit more experiences to build on. Some days I just don't drink, people. Some days, until I surrender one more time. I thank you for everything I have today. I thank you for everything I am today. I owe it all to those who have come before me and all that's come after me. I'm just doing what some old drunk taught me. The people who haven't gotten here yet just haven't gotten here yet. So I thank y'all very much for allowing me to participate in my sobriety tonight. Sorry I ran over. I'm a little